G'day guys, it is coffee time, meaning it is a preview time on My Blue Heaven. This is a cappuccino. I love a cappuccino. Generally, I don't. I'll just take a sip. Generally, I don't drink coffee post 12 o'clock. Very rarely indeed, and it's 2:15 at the moment on a Thursday afternoon, and I am sinking into a coffee, which mightn't bode well for later on, particularly when I'm trying to get to sleep tonight. So, what's your coffee of choice? Let us know in the comments below. This is going to be potentially a lengthy preview of our massive game. Look, every week we talk about massive games, particularly when you're facing teams inside the top 8. This one, the fact that we need to travel, facing the top of the ladder Sydney Swans, who are flying at the moment, and it feels like every player on their list is in nearly career best form. It's a massive challenge for our football team. But before I sink my teeth into that and try and make sense of all this shit I've written on this notepad, I need to address the debacle of our injury list and my thoughts on that. And it's funny, actually, I'm talking about injuries because yesterday afternoon when I got home from work, have a look at that, guys. I slammed my finger in the sliding door. I was racing around the house doing errands, doing jobs, getting things done, and I've slid the door and I jammed my finger in there, and I'm not kidding, it was the most excruciating pain that I can remember. For something that appears so little and so insignificant so for about 10 minutes I was in extraordinary pain, settled down, but last night that throbbed the whole night. So I didn't get a great night's sleep because of that. So it is still pretty bloody sore. So I am about to talk about injuries. I definitely won't be going to see any medicos at our football club in regards to that. I might just go down to the local GP. But I'm like any other supporter at the moment. I'm just sort of shaking my head, in regards to what has unfolded. I think the thing that is really concerning is the fact that this has been going on for a very, very long time, and you could sort of take it early days when we were somewhat rebuilding, and younger bodies, bigger programs, but now we're a fully developed football team. And we're in this position right here, right now. It's just not fucking good enough. And this is almost ambushing. I don't know if ambushing is the right word, but I'm going to use it. It feels like this is giving us very, very little chance. And right here, right now, it just feels like a wasted season already. And it's simply not fucking good enough. And I don't have expertise in this area, and I don't want to talk about the injuries and loading and all that type of stuff because I just don't know. But I got no doubt that Andrew Russell won't be at the football club next year. And the finger has been pointed at him, and I think it's warranted given that he's been at the club for such a long time. And it feels like it's getting even worse. His record at our club is not great, but then you sort of start to look at, you sort of weigh up the success stories, maybe even a Charlie Curnow who looked like his career was done and dusted, and now he's hardly missed any football over the last, 3 years or whatever it's been. Like, it's just been an extraordinary sort of comeback in regards to his body, and he looks like a bloke that will just play forever now. So you look at that success story, but then you look at the players who are just consistently injured and the new soft tissue injuries. And I just think that the move will be made, but I think there's layers of concern right the way through, and I know, the finger will be pointed at Andrew Russell and the physios and the medicos. But you got to look also a little bit deeper than that. The who's, I think obviously all in this together, stronger together, all in it together, and I don't think they necessarily work just separately. So you then go to possibly the next layer, which is the decision makers. Maybe they're at the top. Maybe the likes of Brian Cook and Brad Lloyd, the footy manager, and Luke Sayers, the president, and the Greg Williams, the footy director. I mean, what is their part in this in regards to who are they bringing into the club? Are the reviews done properly? And it just seems like this guy who's been in charge for such a long time is almost untouchable. So you've got to ask questions of our decision makers, particularly in this fucking huge area, which is getting your list fucking right, getting them healthy. You're never going to have a full healthy list. It just doesn't happen. To have 14 players on your injury list and then players coming back in and then injured straight away with similar type injuries, to just say it's bad luck is just not good enough. And then you got to go to the next layer, list management. I'll put a link, guys, from a video I did a while back now. It was at the end of Voss's first year, going into the start of 2023. And I spoke about 5 or 6 players on our list who were given extra time, more contracts, Cunningham, etc. And I was pretty dirty on it at the time. And I said heads would roll if this doesn't work out. And we're now 18 months down the track and we're seeing the same guys on the sidelines consistently. So you have to consider the list managers, Nick Austin, putting this list together, having a lot of players on this list who are just not durable, don't have, it feels like AFL bodies. And I know they're hamstrung in regards to contracts, but geez, I just don't think tougher decisions have been made in that regards as well. And then I think, as much as I feel for Vossi, I really do, you got to have a look at his part in this as well. And what I mean by that is, for example, Orazio Fantasia, which is quite ironic really, because when Orazio came to our club, he was so injury prone, like he just couldn't get on the park. Now he looks fine, like his body looks fine, he just can't get a kick. Now, if Michael Voss wasn't at Carlton, Orazio Fantasia wouldn't be at our football club. He wanted him at our football club. So the coach certainly has to have a say in who he wants to, one, bring in and who he wants to keep. And the perfect example of that would be someone like Caleb Marchbank, who, look, is a very talented footballer, but we just don't see him. We just don't see him. Maybe we see him on Friday night against the Swans, but who knows? But, it won't be long before Caleb Marchbank has another injury, and the coach loves him. The coach loves him. He brought him in last year for the final series. Brody Kemp got dropped. They went with Caleb Marchbank, and he played quite well in the finals, but he's just injury prone. So the coach has to have a say in who remains at the football club, who comes into the football club. And it's, I suppose, a small part in that. So there are layers, but end of the day, just go back to Andrew Russell and his support staff and just think, mate, your time's up. Your time's up. You've taken a lot of money for your services over that time, and when you put so much resources into that department, which you need to do, you've got to make a decision. And I don't think it's even a tough decision now. I just think it's got to that point in time where there's so much fucking noise, and I'd be very, very surprised if Andrew Russell is at our football club in 2025. But that doesn't necessarily help us this year. But in saying that, I must say, as much as there's frustration, and I can be pretty bloody negative at times, we can only concentrate on what we've got in front of us right here, right now, and that's a game, a really important game, and who knows? Who knows what this group is capable of? We still don't know, and I don't think that's probably like a lot of football teams. You don't know what a group is capable of and how much they can give under the circumstances, and we can't predict the future. Maybe these players, maybe there will be a miracle, and we do have somewhat of a healthy list in the second half of the season. I highly doubt it. History says we won't, and maybe that's wishful thinking. But right here, right now, we are taking a pretty bloody strong team to take on the Sydney Swans at the SCG. And I know there in the back of the mind, there'll be a lot of stuff about, well, we've got a lot of injuries, but really, there should be no excuses not to at least go there and be super competitive, because I think it'd be pretty bloody disappointing if we go there and get our pantsers pulled down, which I don't think will happen. I don't think that will be the case. I think, at the very least, we have an incredible leader in Patrick Cripps, who's such a fucking warrior. And I do feel for him that he's just put his body through such rigours since he arrived at this football club. And really, when you think about it, other than maybe his first year where he had a broken leg, he's had a week off here or there, he has just been unbelievable. And from a positive, we still have probably our best 4 or 5 players playing on Friday night against the Sydney Swans, but we're realistic. We need blokes who are on the periphery, on the fringe to go, I reckon, above and beyond to get the job done against the Swans. I'm not necessarily fearful about playing at the SCG. I think the ground, really, when you think about it, should suit us. Because it's a little bit smaller, a little bit cramped, it should be able to help us in regards to our speed, if it is a contested game. And I feel like that's probably, obviously that's going to be our only hope, is to try and dominate that midfield and keep the ball in our front half as much as possible. And I don't feel like my big concern out of the last month or so is our inability to, transfer that ball from the back half. And we won't, if it spends more time in the Swans forward half, I feel like this will be a real battle for us. I really do. So I don't feel like we have that strength in the back half in regards to run and ball use. Pretty dour at the moment and defending quite well as a group, but not necessarily on the way we want to transfer the ball. Look, it's funny, isn't it? The last 2 weeks against Melbourne, we knocked them out of last year's final series and got the job done against them. And we get that opportunity to play Sydney, who we knocked out in the elimination final last year. And it's only around about, 10 games, 11 games ago that we played Sydney at the MCG, and what was an epic game of football. I think, though, when I watched that elimination final and I revisited parts of that game during the week, that was a good game and arguably a better game than the Melbourne game. Obviously, the Melbourne game was really dramatic and it put us into a prelim final, but it was a super game. It ebbed and flowed. We got out to a good start. Sydney hit back, then we got away again, and then Sydney came late. And we got that goal, that really important goal. I think it was to Blake Acres, which sealed that game. Now, the teams have changed quite significantly, particularly for us. So I just went through. Look, while I'm on it, we're in such a precarious position at the moment in regards to our ladder position. Now, I think we all know that, and this is the disappointing thing linking the injuries with our ladder position and the fact that we need to be finishing top 4, top 2, but that's not out of the question. But with every loss, that just becomes less likely. And the next thing, if you're not finishing top 2 or top 4 is you want to finish 5th to at least guarantee a home elimination final, particularly if you face a team from interstate. And we earned that right last year when we finished 5th, and not luckily, because we earned the right to finish 5th to get that home final. And it was a big, look, let's face it was a big positive and advantage for us to play that home final at the MCG in front of our fans. And, just the noise that night was unbelievable. And I think if that game was played at the MCG, the result probably would have gone the other way. That's how important that home ground advantage is. And there's no doubt Sydney have got that home ground advantage at the SCG tomorrow night. But I don't know. I feel like it's not a bigger deal. I think Sydney were a lot stronger at home. I don't feel like they're as strong at home, although they haven't lost the game there this year. It'd be interesting to see how we go about it tomorrow night on that ground. I'm more fearful of the Swans and their makeup rather than the ground itself. Last year when we played them in that elimination final, which wasn't that long ago, these are the players who played in that game. No Doc, no Sard, no Motlop, no Fogarty, no Cottrell, big out, no Chera. Big out, was starting to show some form last week before he went off with that hamstring injury. No Cunningham, question marks on Pitnet whether he will play or not with that finger injury. Marchbank, maybe he comes in now, and obviously Martin out as well. That's a lot of outs. And the only guys that were really added through the off-season that are playing at the moment that will play tomorrow night are Elijah Hollins and potentially Orazio Fantasia. Guys that will come in who didn't play in that game: Cowan, Kennedy, Corey Durden, and Jordan Boyd, who didn't play the Melbourne game either, did he? He ended up coming in for the prelim final. And for the Swannies, they won't have Tom McCartan, who took Charlie to the cleaners that night. Mills obviously won't play. Parker's been playing in the VFL. He played that night. Braden Campbell, interesting one, beautiful ball user. He's been playing in the VFL for the Sydney Swans. And Hickey, the big ruckman who retired, he won't be playing either. And they've added some absolute cream, really. Grundy, Adams has come back in and been serviceable over the last couple of weeks. I love the look of Matty Francis for them, real hard nut, good user of the ball. Sorry, not Matty Roberts, I should call. And James Jordan, who's doing a terrific job as a run-with player, coming across from the Ds. And they had to play Aaron Francis with Tom McCartan going out with concussion. He won't play. But if you think back to the game last year, guys, when we played the Sydney Swans at the SCG, and the scoreline suggests that they won comfortably in that game, but we were right in that game. We kicked poorly. It was a messy game, and there was no Tom McCartan in that game, and there was no Paddy McCartan. I think both were out with concussion, and they held up really well. They held up really well in their defence that night. Aaron Francis did a really good job. So don't undersell him. And also Nick Blakey was extraordinary in that game as a defender. He marked everything in that last quarter, and we kicked poorly in that game as well. We kicked 6 goals, 15. As I mentioned, it's got to be for us. It's got to be whether we can have some significant ascendancy in the midfield. And it's got to be. I just don't feel... I feel like Sydney, if they don't get the game on their terms through the middle of the ground, are still capable of enough with that rebound, just the way they play. I don't think we can. So our only hope is to dominate that area. Losing Chera is not ideal, but we still take in a pretty bloody serviceable midfield group with Cripps and Walsh in terrific form. Kennedy was okay as well. It would be interesting to see what other players we roll through there throughout the evening, because what we do know is Sydney bat very, very deep indeed. So let's have a look at the Swannies, and just looking at the the sports bet here, which I usually do. $1.44 the Swans. I reckon that's going to shorten. I reckon that's just going to... I feel like this is... I don't know about you, but I feel like this is like 70-30 in their favour. We're $2.73. Yeah. So it is first facing seventh. Swans have had 8 wins and 1 loss, which was an extraordinary loss against the Richmond Football Club at the MCG. They'd be really disappointed with that, and they're setting up their season superbly. Talk about the home ground advantage, and they would be desperate to win this game to set their season up. They will have, no doubt, a lull throughout the year. So these wins for them are super important, particularly at home, because if they finish top 2, they're probably playing in a grand final. That's how big it is, and I think they know that. And we're 7th. We're 7th on the ladder. They've beaten some quality teams. They've beaten Melbourne, Collingwood, Essendon. Then they've been on a 5. After that Richmond loss, they've had 5 straight wins. They smacked Fremantle last week. There was a little bit with that in regards to, the situation with the death of Cam McCarthy and how that affected the Fremantle players. But I don't think any of us would have been surprised to see Sydney convincingly beat Fremantle, regardless of the situation. When I saw that scoreline, I wouldn't have been surprised, even if there wasn't anything affecting Fremantle. Easily accounted for the Giants in the Battle of the Bridge. Smashed Hawthorn, who found some form. Easily beat the Suns at home, and the Eagles pushed them at Optus Stadium, but in the end they won comfortably. So they're just playing super footy. They and they've got players who are probably in the best form of their career, and we've been I think pretty bloody solid. And pretty bloody stoic if you really think about it, because we've faced some tough opposition, and I don't think there's any tougher at the moment than the Swans at the SCG. So we'll take a look at their lineup, and they're so strong at the moment, they can't... Obviously, Mills is not coming back at the moment. Parker's ready to go, but they can't play him. They can't even fit him in. And I mentioned Braden Campbell. I mean, he's another player. He just fit into our team like a glove in the way he uses the ball on that left peg. I mentioned their defence. You look at it and go, fuck, we can get them. You just look at it and go, geez, we can get them. But then you underestimate guys, the selflessness of a guy like Lewis Melican, and even Aaron Francis, the way he's fitted into that system. The reliability of a Dane Rampy. Nick Blakey needs to be watched, just needs to be watched. And then, like, the effervescent, is that the right word? Effervescent? The evergreen. What the fucking what am I talking about? The evergreen, underrated Harry Cunningham, he just does a job. And Ollie Florent, who they can't fit him into the midfield. So he's a hard nut down back who gives them a bit of run and gun. And that centre line just... That centre line of Errol Gilden and the real antagoniser, Justin McInerney. Who goes to who? I feel that Ollie might go to Errol because he's probably less physical. And maybe Blake Acres goes to Justin McInerney. I actually feel for... And this is the problem when you have these fucking big injuries, guys. These big injury lists. You can't manage your workhorses. And I spoke about Blake Acres last week that he's fucking running himself ragged. You just can't manage them. You just can't manage them enough. And I'm going to keep a close eye on Blake Acres tomorrow night in regards to his body, and he's always going to go above and beyond. I'd like him to go to maybe the stronger Justin McInerney. Who knows? That's a quality centre line. And the guy that I think we probably should put the most work into. I know people will say Isaac Heaney, but I think the guy that scares me the most in this team is Chad Warner. He's got the outside speed. He's like fucking lightning quick. Lightning quick. And the thing that exposed us against Collingwood was that those players on the outside. He's a super player, Chad Warner. So I'm not quite sure how we manage him. Not quite sure. Give me some ideas, because you've got to consider Errol Gordon, you've got to consider Isaac Heaney, and then you've got those guys, those fucking in and under hard nuts like James Rowbottom, and just they're tackling machines and just sacrifice their game for the betterment of their team. Pretty bloody dangerous. Yeah, and you know James Jordan will probably go, potentially do a Sam Walsh. I like their forward line. It's sort of unassuming, but you know, since Buddy's gone, it's still developing, particularly their tools, Logan McDonald, Joel Amati. And this is I suppose the advantage they've got. They're both pretty mobile, and Hayden McLean can go into the ruck, but be a dangerous option forward because he's a relatively competent forward. So they don't lose their structure with their bigs. And then they've got is he a hybrid, Will Hayward? And this might be a bit of a rehearsal if he comes to our football club next year. He's been in really good form. One thing I am really confident is I feel like Chincotta will do a job on Tom Papley, and I think he'll beat him. I really do. I think we've got that one right. You know, he's done some good jobs over the last couple of weeks, and I feel like he's in a really good headspace to play that role on Tom Papley. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. They got Taylor Adams back in as well, who's just an extra layer through that midfield, whether it's a pressure forward. And then you look at that ruck situation. I don't necessarily rate... Don't get me wrong, he's a fucking good player. But I don't rate Brodie Grundy as highly as a lot do. He doesn't... I don't know. I don't feel like I'm sort of looking at this game. I was probably more wary of Luke Jackson when we played Fremantle than what I am of Brodie Grundy. Maybe I'm underestimating him, but I don't know if Pitness does play and it is just TDK. I think it's a great challenge for TDK to go up against Brodie Grundy. He's in super form, but it's not one that scares the hell out of me. And Isaac Heaney, this is why I feel like the stars are aligning for Sydney, because, I don't know, premiership teams and teams that are at the top of their game, there is a breakout year for a real superstar who's maybe underachieved somewhat. And Richmond are a fine example of that with Dusty, who always threatened but was a little bit inconsistent. Then suddenly he just went bang. And Isaac Heaney is that player this year. And he got his opportunity in the midfield because they lost so many troops through there with Parker and Mills and the injury to Taylor Adams the early days. So they threw him in there. And the thing that makes him, you just can't go with him, is because he's so tough. So you put someone on him who's tough, but then he'll then get you on the outside with his skill and his marking ability and his ball use. He's a super player. And Rowbottom's arguably one of the toughest players going around at the moment. So I've just painted a pretty bloody bright picture of the Sydney Swans. They got Wicks. If he plays as another small forward, Roberts gives them a different sort of dynamic with that left foot as well through the midfield or on a wing. And Jake Lloyd, I think Cottrell played a role on Jake Lloyd last year in that final and did really well. Cottrell kicked 2 goals in that elimination final, was so important, playing a bit of a defensive forward role. And that's I think that role really suits him. So I'm not quite sure who plays that role, because Lloyd will rack them up, And I think what we do know about Sydney is their ball use is super. And any team that's played Sydney this year will know that they're in for a game. I think from our point of view, even though it's been a really strange week for us, guys, and um, I'm not going to be throwing the baby out with the bathwater if we don't get the job done here, because this is such a big ask to go to the Sydney and beat them, and it feels like we'll need something extraordinary, similar to the Brisbane game in the opening round, which was extraordinary. That's what it feels like with this. Can we stay in the game long enough with our own pressure? And we know Sydney's pressure is. We see how dangerous they are, but that is their one wood. In the end of the day, they're extremely well coached by a guy that knows the caper and knows his players. I'm a big fan of Sydney. They're a super club, a bit like Geelong in that respect, but they've just got a great balance. So it's a tough ask, but we're not out of it, because we're taking over a really, really solid side. I mean, our ins, our outs obviously hurt a little bit. Shera, I think that hurts. That hurts us probably more than Martin on that ground. And if Pitt doesn't play, yeah, that's questionable whether it hurts. But the ins, I mean, it feels like Binns might have to come in. Does Fantasia come back in on the back of really poor form? I know he had 20 odd possessions in the VFL, but most of those were handballs, which mean he's under a little pressure because his speed's gone. We know probably Williams will come back in. We need him to defend strongly first and foremost, and use the ball really well. There's not a lot coming in that's giving you a hell of a lot of confidence in this game. So it's got to be a midfield domination. It's got to be, and I feel if we can do that, we potentially can disrupt their defence. We're capable of doing that, but we just know everything's probably got to fall out well tomorrow night at the SCG. And the thought, guys, that we don't get the job done, what will it be? Come Sunday night, we might be sitting outside the top 8. I hope not. Anyway, take care and I'll speak soon. And cheers.